they have a lot of sayings in Las Vegas, right? Like people say a lot of things in Vegas. One of the things that they say is that my life is all rolled up in the roll of the dice. Now, there are many ways that roll of the dice can come out. Sometimes you get snake eyes. For those who don't know, I'm going to educate you just a little bit. Snake eyes, when you roll 2 ones. Then you get boxcars, or if you're really fancy and smooth, you call that midnight. And that's 2 sixes. And sometimes, I can't believe I get to say this word in church, sometimes you crap out, roll 7s. That's not good. But regardless of what it is, okay, it's all just coincidence. It's all just a roll of the dice. You could win big, or you could wind up disastrous. It's just out of your hands. In the book of Esther, the destiny of the Jews all boils down to a roll of the dice. But we're also going to see that God is working behind the scenes to fulfill his grand saving purpose the entire time. The book of Esther presents one of the most intriguing episodes in the story. One of my favorite stories is the book of Esther. Now, as we recall from last time, when the Jews made their way back to Jerusalem, they did it in 3 different waves. The book of Esther takes place around 483 BC. That puts it between the first wave, led by Zerubbabel, love it, and the second wave, led by Ezra, excuse me. Now, at this time, the book of Esther takes place at 483 BC. Lots of Jews are still living in the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Persia, a.k.a. the kingdom formerly known as the kingdom of Babylon. There's also got tons of them located in the capital city. And also during this time, there's this gentleman by the name of Haman. Haman is a guy who has a passionate hatred for the Jews. Like, he does not like the Jews. Especially one by the name of Mordecai. Yeah, that guy gets right under his skin. And there's reasons for all this, and before we can really understand why he holds such hatred in his heart, we need to find out what those reasons are. So we're going to touch on a little bit of a backstory here. Part of it is found in the 3rd chapter of Esther, just the first 2 verses. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Haggagite, jeez Louise, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Haman was an Agagite. And for those of you who don't know, that means he was a descendant of King Agag, who was king of the Amalekites. You remember the Amalekites? For those of you, just for it's a little foggy, let me tell you, the Amalekites were one of those people that God said, you better destroy every last one of them, or there's going to be problems. And then Saul was like, every last one of them, gotcha. And then in 1 Samuel 15, 7 through 9, we find that, and Saul smote the Amalekites from Havilah until thou comest to Shur, that is over against Egypt. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, and of the oxen, and of the fatlings, and the lambs, and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them, but everything that was vile and refuse, they destroyed utterly. So Saul was like, right, destroy them all, check. Destroy them all but that guy. We're going to bring that guy with us. And I'm sure that won't yield any awful fruit. Because it only takes one, right? It only takes one. So Haman has a huge bone to pick with the Jews. And the reason he has this bone to pick with the Jews is because essentially they were responsible for wiping out all of his people, all of his father's kingdom. So just his dad was the only one left. So I'm sure he's like, yeah, I'm an Agagite, but deep down I'm an Amalekite. And you Jews killed all my people. Now, as far as Mordecai was concerned, Haman's ego got the best of him because Mordecai wouldn't bow to this guy. Didn't show him the reverence that Haman felt that he deserved. Mordecai was obedient to God. He wasn't about to show any man the reverence that was deserved to God. Psalm 111:9 reads, He sent redemption unto his people. He hath commanded his covenant forever. Holy and reverend is his name. Here's a little backstory. I'm Pastor Jamie. Please don't call me Reverend. Reverend is a word that is mentioned one time in the Bible. And it's right here. And it is directly descriptive of God. I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not saying anything about anybody else that refers to themselves as reverend. We have to answer for the things that we do and the things that we feel that we're okay. But God puts that on my heart not to be called that. And maybe I'm just splitting hairs, but, well, it's my title, so don't call it me that. So you got a guy with a red hot vendetta against the Jews, and that's exactly who you want holding a high position of power under King Xerxes and the kingdom of Persia, right? Probably not. So Haman sees Mordecai. He sees that he doesn't bow to him, and he wants him dead. But rather than lash out against him specifically, because he knows that what that's going to do is that's going to bring a you-know-what storm back his way, he doesn't want anything to do with that, so he devises a little bit of a plan, is what he does. So he casts Pur, or lots, in order to determine the day that his revenge against the Jews should be enacted. In other words, he was putting the fate of the Jews on the roll of the dice. And the outcome of the dice came up Adar 13th, the month of Adar, the 13th day. Now, line that calendar up with our calendar, that's March 10th. And that's the day that Haman would attempt to have the Jews exterminated. Now, when Haman convinces King Xerxes to decree that the extermination of the Jews in all 127 provinces of the Persian Empire, the edict says not only that, but that whoever kills the Jews gets to keep all their stuff. Just a little extra incentive in there. Sweeten the pot a little bit. Haman saw himself as a great deliverer of his people. And I don't think it's a far stretch to say that he probably wanted to go down in Amalekite history as the man who served up a nice cold dish of revenge to the Jews who under Saul wiped them all out. So when Mordecai hears of this decree, he's beside himself with anguish. He tore off his clothes, replacing them with sackcloth. He puts a bunch of ashes on his head. And the Bible tells us, quote, he went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud, bitter cry. Mordecai wasn't the only one either. Scripture tells us that many Jews throughout the entire province, or in every province of the Persian kingdom, they were doing the exact same thing. Their days were numbered. Literally. Like it was just a matter of time. Now, once all of this begins, the queen's handmaidens, gosh, what is my problem today? Y'all should have heard me over at the other church, man. Like, I sound like I got marbles in my mouth for like a good, I'm pretty sure some of them things I said over there weren't even words. So once this begins, the queen's handmaidens make her aware of everything that's going on. Now, the queen is none other than the cousin of Mordecai. And I know what that said earlier. I know. It said that Esther was Mordecai's daughter. That's not true. Mordecai was Esther's guardian, but they did not have that biological relationship of father and daughter. That's not what that was. They were cousins. So it's sort of true, but I think there's some clarification that needs to happen. And that's all. But anyway, you know the story. Esther's this Jewish girl who gets selected as queen after Vashti is deposed for resisting King Xerxes' call to appear before him. King Xerxes had an eye for pretty ladies. And Vashti was a pretty lady. So one day Xerxes is like, Vashti, get in here. I want to show all my buddies how good looking you are. And Vashti was like, not today. I got better things to do. And Xerxes is like, well, let me add to that list. One of the things you can do is get out then. Because I'll find a queen that will come when I beckon. And we know that he had an eye for the pretty ladies, because how does he go about choosing his next queen? He holds a beauty contest. Fellas in the back, don't pick your queen based on a beauty contest. 9 times out of 10, that's going to be a train wreck for you. Just saying. So even though a beauty contest is being held to find the next queen, God is present behind the scenes. Esther is selected as queen of the entire kingdom. And at the time, Xerxes had no idea of her nationality. Mordecai told her to keep a lid on it. They weren't sure why she was being placed in this position, but now it was starting to become a little bit more evident as to why this might be happening. So by sending word back to each other through messengers, Mordecai relays a plea to Esther. It's up to the queen to do something about this. She has to go talk to the king. That's all there is to it. Now this might seem like a page right out of the no-brainer handbook. There's a little more to it than that. The fact of the matter is that this was one of the most daring and courageous moves imaginable on the part of Esther. We pick up in Esther chapter 4, verse 11, and these beginning ones are the words of Esther. All the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out his golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come unto the king these 30 days. And they told to Mordecai Esther's words. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go, gather all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me. And neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise. And so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. See, Esther's like, you know, I know, and everybody else knows, that if anybody goes into the king without being called first, they're going to have a bad day. Unless the king decides to extend the golden scepter, and then it's all good. But Esther's like, hey, what makes you think that's going to happen for me? He hasn't even wanted to see me in the last 30 days. And Mordecai replies, he's like, stop thinking about yourself. Do you think that when all this goes down that you're going to escape this? Like you're in the same boat as everybody else. And who are you to say that this isn't exactly the reason why you haven't been placed in this position from the word go? So Esther says, okay, I'll go talk to him, but first, we're going to fast. 3 days, 3 nights, no food, no drink. I want to talk about the power of fasting for just a moment here. We talked about this on Ash Wednesday. And it's a practice that we give up things for Lent. But all too often we label that as fasting. Like there's this big misconception that like, oh, you can fast from like, you're a little one, you want to fast too? You can fast from watching cartoons. No, you really can't. Because fasting is specific. Fasting applies to food and drink. Every instance in the Bible that mentions fasting, it's not talking about giving up other things. It's talking about food and drink. Even modern dictionaries, if you look up the definition of fasting in the dictionary, it doesn't give it the same rubber stamp that modern Christianity has seemed to give to fasting, that it can be for anything. Now, am I saying that abstaining from something is a bad thing? No. No. And so that I'm not accused of just simply splitting hairs, let me explain why I say this. Because there is such a massive power behind fasting that we should know what fasting really is so that we're not doing something that we think is fasting. And then when there's not a lot of the same spiritual power behind that our faith isn't shaken. That's important. So that's why I say that. So if you want to, if you want to stop, Facebook's a big one now. I have 10 or 15 people in my Facebook feed. See you in 40 days. Okay. Nothing wrong with that. Probably shouldn't go on Facebook anyway. It's awful. If you want to give up Reese's Pieces for 40 days, that's cool too. Your waistband will probably appreciate you when it's all said and done. But we just shouldn't give it the same that fasting has. Because every time fasting is done in the Bible, every time it's mentioned in the Bible, there's a huge outcome behind it too. So Esther fasts for 3 days. And then she approaches the king. And what happens? Instead of having her executed, he extends the gold scepter. Gives her a pass. Now by this time, she's got a plan to expose Haman. But for the time being, Esther simply invites the king and Haman to a banquet that's already been prepared. And the king knew that she had a request of him, but she wasn't going to ask until it was time for the banquet. So now Xerxes is having a sleepless night, right? Here's God behind the scenes at work. Because Xerxes can't sleep. And man, like, who can? I don't know about you guys, but let me tell you something. Don't come up to Pastor Jamie and say, Pastor Jamie, Pastor Jamie, I got something I want to tell you. But I'm going to tell you tomorrow. No, you're not. You're going to tell me right now. Is anybody else like that? Like, don't do that to me. And of course, I know what's going to happen now. I'm going to shake your hands. Pastor Jimmy, I got something to tell you tomorrow. So I beat you to it. I already made fun of you for doing that. So don't do that either. But nobody likes that. King Xerxes didn't like that either. He couldn't sleep. Up all night thinking about it. Guys, wonder what she wants. First of all, it must have been important enough I could have killed what she did. And she got something to ask me, and then not going to tell me? Gosh. I know. Somebody should bring the chronicles of all the things that I've done and read to me how awesome I am. That'll take my mind off the situation. So that's what he does. They bring the chronicles of the reign of Xerxes in, and they begin to read them to him. And throughout this reading, here's God at work behind the scenes. Throughout this reading, he's reminded of a time of an assassination attempt on his life that was foiled by none other than Mordecai. So he gets to thinking, man, I might have to do something about that. I'm going to have to do something about that. I don't think I ever truly thanked him. So the next day, Xerxes informs Haman that he would like to honor a man and ask him how a hero should be appropriately honored, right? And Haman's like this, my liege. Well, let me tell you. They should parade the man through the streets in a royal robe worn by you personally, while someone announces to all the people, while it is proclaimed, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. And the king's like, I love it. Let's do this. He orders it to be done. He orders that Mordecai was the one to be paraded through the streets in honor. And Haman's like, but then Xerxes is like, oh, but there's lots of honor to go around, Haman. Since you came up with such a fancy idea, I would like to bestow upon you the honor of being the one to proclaim how awesome I think Mordecai is to everyone. You get to be the guy to follow along and say all that. Can't imagine how infuriated and embarrassed and humiliated and a bunch of other yateds that Haman was. But he had no choice. That's what the king said to do. So later, at a private dinner, arranged by Esther, the queen's request is finally revealed. Esther reveals that she is a Jew. She asks Xerxes to spare the lives of the Jews, which would include her life as well. Haman is then exposed as the one who seeks to have all the Jews killed on Adar 13th. And in the end, Haman is executed on the very same gallows that he had built just for Mordecai. How's that for a little bit of poetic justice? But there's still a problem. See, King Xerxes is stuck in that same situation that King Darius was in the time of Daniel. Because once the king makes a decree, it cannot be changed, it cannot be erased, not even by the king himself. So he's in that problem. There's this decree out there for... Wow, excuse me. There's a decree out there that the entire country was to turn on the Jews. And any Jew that you killed, you got to keep their stuff. He couldn't take it back. Thank you. Oh. Ricola. Mixed berry. It's like you were in my head. So impactful, I lost where I was. Oh, boom. Okay. So what's the king to do? He's got this decree in place. He can't take it back. Instead, he issues an additional decree. And what he says is that come Adar 13th, it's on. And by that I mean the Jews are not only encouraged, but literally commanded to defend themselves. So the king puts into play an edict that essentially levels the playing field. The Jews are no longer helpless. Because even if the Jews fought back, how dare you touch a member of my kingdom? You're executed. Like it was a no-win situation. But now, it was like, look, if anybody comes at you, tries to kill you and take your stuff, you best be packing and let them know that that was a bad idea. And that's what they did. When the day finally arrives, the Jews are victorious. They declare Adar 13th, March 10th, as a victory day. And on March 10th, to this day, the Feast of Purim is celebrated in the synagogues every year. It's also known as the Festival of Dice. Mordecai is once again honored by King Xerxes. This time, he's given Haman's place as an official in the Persian Empire, and the beautiful and courageous Esther continues as his queen. So what do we take from this? Like, what do we learn about God from the story of Esther? First of all, let's just get this out of the way. Interesting tidbit of information. God is not mentioned one time in the book of Esther. Not one time. You will not find the name God anywhere in that book. However, God's presence, God's moving hand, God's working in the upper story, in the story of Esther, is just undeniable. So while he's not mentioned by name, he's there. And that's clear to see. We learn that God is always in control. Proverbs 16:33 tells us, the lot is cast into the lap, but the whole disposing thereof is of the Lord. So you roll them dice, but how they come out, it's up to God. Secondly, we move on to Colossians 2:16-17. Let no man therefore judge you in meat, or in drink, or in respect of an holy day, or of the new moon, or of the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. This passage, in short, tells us that Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of all of the Old Testament feasts, including Purim. So we don't need to be afraid of anything anymore. We really don't. Like, we've all got fears. We've all got fears. Every one of us. And you name it. I mean, we're looking at illness, aging, not enough money, loss of job, loss of home, family breakdown, being alone, wayward children, depression, death. It goes on and on and on and on. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What we need to do is we need to take those fears, we need to lift them up and give them to God. And let me tell you something. That seems like a hard thing to do. But first of all, worrying isn't going to help anything. You want to talk about the most non-productive practice. Like, man, I don't know what I'm going to do. Oh, I'm going to worry. Step one, I'm going to worry. And maybe if I worry hard enough, it'll just magically disappear. This never once happened. But it's still hard to do that. It's hard to relinquish control because that's what it is. We're putting our mercy in God's hands. And our flesh hates that. We want to take care of things on our own. But there's something that comes with that. There isn't a more liberating experience than when you can totally lift your fears up and give them to God and not have to worry about something. Yeah, but what are we going to do about the... I don't know. Let's not worry about it. That doesn't mean that, like, if you're having trouble finding a job and your rent's due, that you just all of a sudden go, Pastor James said don't worry about it. Wonder what's on TV. No, don't do that. But don't make yourself sick over it. Anyone ever seen somebody get sick over worry? Like physically ill over that? That stuff will eat you up inside. It's bad. And it's pointless. Like worrying about something is like, I don't know. I don't have a good analogy. Sorry, I didn't mean to set you guys up like that. I take that back. Finally, we need to take a courageous stand. We need to be like Esther and Mordecai. And it's a hard thing to say. Or I mean, it's a hard thing to do. It's an easy thing to say. But it's hard to do. Sometimes it's downright scary. Or a lot of times that the deck is going to be stacked against us. The chips are going to be down and all this other Las Vegas-y, slogan-y talk. But we can't be ashamed of what we are and what we believe. And we need to be ready to just be out with that too. There's this thing that happened last night, this Winter Jam thing. That there fella that sings for Skillet. He gave a real good testimony. He told a story about when he toured with some other bands in the area. And last time they were in Michigan, they were touring with a bunch of bands that, like, honestly, like, what are you doing playing with those guys? Like, why are you playing with Godsmack? I don't understand that. But that's neither here nor there. He said that he had somebody approach him and say, you know, Skillet could be one of the biggest bands ever. But you guys got to stop with all that Jesus talk. And he's, nope. That's not going to happen. And then in turn, his band played in front of a sold-out crowd at the Palace. 17,000 people. Says the biggest tour that his band's ever been. It was a Christian audience. A Christian music festival. But I know it takes guts to say something like that to one of your peers. And that's small potatoes. The Bible tells us that the world is going to hate our guts because of Jesus. So sometimes it's going to be a lot worse than just telling some producer at a rock festival that you're going to not stop talking about Jesus at your shows. Sometimes the stakes are going to be a lot higher than that. But we still need to be courageous. Be courageous. Give your fears up to the Lord. We got another saying in Vegas, too. It's that the odds are always in favor of the house. That's true here, too. Because God is always